Okay, so we've come quite a ways here. We started off with one session on asana. We did 3 sessions on pranayama. We talked briefly on pratyahara, and today we're going to discuss higher limb practice or samyama, which is dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. So this is definitely an important one. Basically all about meditation. Everything else that we discussed was kind of the precursor, the things that build up to the higher limb practice. We also haven't talked about yamas and niyamas yet. We're going to circle around back to that at the end. Um, so without further ado, we can get started. So just as a brief refresher, on pratyahara, um, pratyahara means interiorization. And we typically use asana and pranayama to bring the body and mind into a point of interiorization. And what interiorization really means, it's really the biggest um, signal that to look for really is kind of the body kind of fading out of your awareness. Um, it will slowly kind of melt away into the background. Now, it doesn't mean it vanishes completely. Like, you can always bring your awareness back to your body at any time, but you'll interiorize and the body will kind of just vanish from your awareness. It'll no longer bother you. I've had times where I come out of pratyahara and realize, oh crap, my knee really hurts and it's been hurting for a long time, but I didn't even realize it, because I was so deeply interiorized, so deep in pratyahara. So the physical body fades away and stops being a nuisance when you're in pratyahara. The next step is dharana, and dharana simply translates to concentration. So remember all of these words that we're using, they're all just different points on the spectrum, right? So we're starting with pratyahara, and then right about here, say we get into dharana, and then over here is dhyana, and then over here is samadhi. They're really not that far apart from each other. Um, so we're kind of working on this slice over here, which is concentration. So we pratyahara is all about the body. Dharana is all about the mind, the thinking mind specifically. Um, as Forrest would like to call it, is the left brain. The part of your brain that thinks thoughts, and the part of your brain um, that filters down on things. The left brain is it's almost like a cropping mechanism. Okay, so if I'm looking forward right now and I can see, the screen on my laptop over there, and when I'm looking at that, my focus is kind of cropping that laptop. So I see the laptop and everything around it is just kind of blurred out and just really kind of almost kind of cut out of the picture. Like I almost, unless I'm paying attention to it, it's almost like I don't even see it at all. And that's really what the left brain is good for. Is it's good at really kind of cropping things out. So as you start getting into dharana, you should start feeling it kind of like an expansion, and kind of like you're bringing things in more and cropping things out less. So you're getting more of the information from your nervous system, um, whereas the left brain is normally kind of cutting a lot of that out and filtering most of it out. You're not getting the full signal. Interestingly, this is one reason why people take psychedelics. I don't condone that, especially for Kriya bonds. It's unnecessary at best and harmful at worst. But that's one of the things that people use those for, is to eliminate that filter and to get the full signal from the nervous system. We get the same thing from meditation, um, which is why psychedelics are unnecessary at best. Um, so the marker when you're fully in dharana is when the thinking mind also fades away, just like the body faded away. You're not getting those. Um, the point where dharana turns into dhyana, once you're in dhyana, there is no more mental distractions. Your mind is no longer bringing up distracting thoughts about work or about what you're going to do later, or whatever else. It's not bringing up any of those distracting thoughts. So um, unless you've gotten to a point where those thoughts have completely seated, you haven't gotten into dhyana. If you have, then congratulations, you have, which brings us over into dhyana, which is dual absorption. And in dhyana, you no longer have any gross or subtle distractions of any kind. It's an absorption state. You're fully absorbed in your meditation object. Now it's still a dualistic absorption, because you are a separate consciousness that is observing a separate object. So, say if, for instance, I were, just doing regular breath meditation and just focusing on, the sensations of the breath going in and out of the nostrils. When you'd get into dhyana, there would be no thoughts other than just a constant stream of thoughts on the sensations of the breath coming in and out of your nostrils. You wouldn't have any background chatter going on. You wouldn't have any distractions in the body, going on. All of those things you've moved past. You're fully absorbed and locked in on your meditation object, whatever that may be. You know, when I say locked in, don't think I mean like shrinking down on it, because once again, that's the left brain we're trying to get away from. Should be kind of more expansive. Um, One thing to note is that most Buddhist practices stop at dhyana. They don't like to go to samadhi. Really the only Buddhist practices that go to samadhi are the immaterial jhanas, and most lineages don't teach those. They stick in the material jhanas, which are all in the realm of dhyana. No, there's a very important reason why they do that, and that was because um, the way that the Buddha designed the system was, he started off with the philosophy, and then he created techniques to prove out that philosophy. And um, the only way to do that, the only way to do things like vipassana, where you're generating insight, or even material jhanas, the only way to do these things is to keep your separation from the meditation object. You have to be observing something else, and to gain the insight and whatever else you need to prove out the philosophy. So Buddhist paths don't go into samadhi very often. Now they use the term samadhi, but they use it differently than we do as yogis, and that's an important thing, an important distinction. What they consider samadhi is about what we consider dharana. Okay, samadhi to them just simply means concentration, whereas samadhi to us is a non-dual absorption. So there's a world of difference between the two. We've got obviously two limbs of yoga difference between um, dharana, or what they would refer to samadhi, and what we call samadhi as yogis. So, um, so yeah, you have the dharana, where you're absorbed and just fully, you're still separate from the object. But during dharana, remember that it's a spectrum, so it's not just like one point. There's depths to dharana, and as you get deeper, or not dharana, dhyana. as you get deeper in dhyana, the borderlines between you and your meditation object start to kind of blur and break down. Okay. So if you ask me, I would tell you that dhyana is probably the most entertaining of all of the limbs. And it's funny because that's the limb that most people kind of try to skip over, they just kind of like, we just want to race to samadhi, you know. But all of the crazy psychedelic um, experiences, visions, that kind of thing really starts to come in dhyana. And there's a couple reasons for that. One of them is in the earlier stages of dhyana, the left brain has kind of went to sleep. It's kind of shut up, but the right brain hasn't. And the right brain is very visual and very open. And that um, right brain, when it gets really stimulated and when it doesn't have the left brain to kind of balance it out so much, when it kind of is taking hold, it can kind of bring up some really interesting visual um, experiences. You can even reach periods where you almost feel like you're dreaming while you're awake. That's very, very common in the early stages of dhyana, to feel kind of like you're dreaming, but you're fully awake. It's really interesting. And then as you pass through that, and the right brain starts to settle down as well, and you also put the right brain to sleep. Not literally to sleep. I'm just using that as um, an example here. Don't take that too literally. As the right brain calms and fades out of the picture as well, what happens is that borderline between your consciousness, and the meditation object that you're observing starts to break down. You're no longer a body, so you're no longer bound. You feel boundless at this point. You're going to feel expanded. At the very least, you're going to feel expanded. Your consciousness may take on all kinds of different shapes, at this point in time. So, that can feel kind of psychedelic, where it can feel like it's maybe you're a square or you're a circle or kind of a blob or maybe a cylinder or, you can feel like your consciousness takes on all kinds of weird shapes during this stage. Um, so these things are totally common. A lot of beginners, when they first start feeling this, they get all freaked out. They'll either get really scared or really excited, and they'll go blasting online message boards. Oh my God, I had this experience happen. What was it? And it's just a normal experience, when you start getting into the deeper states of meditation. All kinds of interesting things will happen. Most of the time they're not. It's not anything significant. If it's something significant, you'll know it's significant. And I think we talked about this last week a bit as well, about like the hallucinations and stuff like that, and um, how unless it feels like it's something really significant, like God coming down and talking to you or something like that, the point of meditation isn't to hallucinate. So let's not focus on the hallucinations. Let's let those go into the background as well and let them go. Just like we let the left brain go, just like we let the body go. Let's let the hallucinations kind of go and let them pass as well, because we need to move beyond them. As pleasurable as this experience is, a lot of people want to get stuck here, and they just want to kind of treat it like an amusement park, and treat it like a drug. Like I'm just going to sit here and trip out on my meditation and think that is going to cause something profound to happen, and it's not. You know, the profound stuff happens when you pass through it, when you get into samadhi. Samadhi is stillness. It's non-dual and it's pure stillness. It's not. Um, it's going to be intense, but it's not going to be as hallucinatory as some of these stages in dhyana can be. So, um, in samadhi, we'll get to a little bit more in depth later. Samadhi is the non-dual version, obviously, where they're the perspective flips in on itself. You're no longer observing something separate. You're still observing that thing, but you are observing it as yourself. You become that thing. The difference between the meditator, the meditation object, and the uh, practice of meditation, the experience of meditation, all break down and they all become just one thing. It's really interesting. Um, really interesting. So let's kind of take a step back here. Now that I've kind of given you a brief overview of the limbs. Well, actually, before I do that, do we have any questions on Dharana and Dhyana? No such thing as a silly question. Sure. Yeah, that's not a stupid question at all. So, yes, Lahiri Mahashaya used a term called paravasta. And paravasta is just another term for Samyama, basically. It's just upper limb practice, Dharana, Dhyana, and Samadhi. It just is basically meditation in itself. So, when you're in paravasta, you're no longer performing you're no longer performing pranayama. You're just meditating. So, yeah, it's a synonym for samyama, basically. That's what we're discussing here. Correct. And that's kind of where I think he was the genius of him using that term, paravasta, is because it doesn't differentiate by level. If somebody is not getting into samadhi, if they're only going to dharana, they're still practicing um, um, they're still practicing parvas though, right? Whether they're getting into dharana or whether they're getting into samadhi. And I think he's partially by using that term, he's trying to get people to stop striving to move levels because going into samadhi, and you notice each of these steps, we're letting go of something else, right? So in pratyahara, we're letting go of the body, and in dharana, we're letting go of the left brain, and in dhyana, we're letting go of the right brain, really. And in samadhi, you'll see when we get into the eight limbs of samadhi, there's multiple layers of samadhi where we're letting go of different things. So this whole process of meditation is just a letting go. It's a release. It's not an attainment of anything, So, and sometimes people take these steps of the Yoga Sutras in these different states they hear about, and they try and think of it as an attainment and achievement, and it's not. It's a releasing of things, to getting rid of, not a gaining of anything. No, no, I wouldn't say that. No, the different levels of kriya, they're definitely each one is a little more powerful than the last, right? But even Lahiri Mahashaya himself said everything that you need is in the first initiation alone. You can go all the way through to Samprajnata Samadhi just practicing first Kriya alone. Now it's going to take you a lot longer than if you're practicing, multiple of the techniques, multiple of the advanced techniques. Each of those advanced techniques puts the places the gas pedal down a little bit more, I guess you could say. So they speed up the process of getting that deep, and they make it make you able to get there more consistently. But they're not necessary. They're not needed. You can get all the way just with first kriya alone. Kitchery is the same way. It's a shortcut. It's not something that is needed. It's just a shortcut. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And first Kriya can take you all the way there, so it takes a little more time. But even with advanced practice, first Kriya is still really important. In the Garland of Letters, Lahiri Mahashaya himself told people, that the biggest problem that advanced Kriya bonds bump into is they don't practice enough first Kriya. I think he always used really high numbers. So he told people to practice 600 first Kriya before you even go into the advanced Kriya, which is crazy because that's like a 10-hour Kriya session alone by itself. But that was the example that he used in the Garland of Letters. So, he said that advanced practitioners, a lot of them want to get rid of first Kriya altogether or cut it way down. And that basically that's a mistake. So it is still the most important kriya, even for an advanced kriya bond. You should be doing more first kriya than you are any of the higher ones. Yeah, yeah. I've had my fair share of hallucinations in Dhyana. Yes, some pretty intense ones, and yeah, I had to pass through them as well. There's times when they can be very pleasurable and very like a really good dream. You don't want to wake up from it sometimes, but if you want to move on, you have to. Okay, cool. So one thing, as we come back and we're talking about higher limb practice. Okay, so let's talk about some strategies to help you move through. I mean, obviously we have pranayama. Okay, and pranayama can take you. You can use pranayama as long as you're using it like Kriya, like where we're meditating and doing pranayama at the same time. You can use that to take you all the way, to the edge of samadhi, basically. To where you basically just get yourself right to the ledge and then just let go and just melt away into it. And that's usually what we'll kind of do is in Kriya. But somebody like if you're doing something like Hatha yoga, you're not going to get that deep because you're not meditating. Um, as your first priority, during your pranayama. So, one thing I just kind of wanted to bring up, and this is something that we're going to get into even more depth when we get into the samadhi here, but um, vitarka and vichara, okay, are two tools that you can use. You can use in your meditation. You can even use it in your kriya, okay, and they're tools to help you to focus and to stay on your meditation object and to be able to go deeper into your meditation. And both Vitarka and Vichara are still present as you get into Samadhi. And people might say, whoa, wait a minute, when I tell you the definitions of this. Okay, Vitarka means gross reasoning. It's gross thought. Whoa, wait a minute. You mean you still have thought in Samadhi? Yes. And Sa Vitarka Samadhi, which is the first level of Samprajnata Samadhi, yes, you still have gross thought. And then the second one is Vichara, which is subtle reasoning. We'll kind of get into the difference of these two here. And you're probably already using both of these to a degree in your meditation. You just probably haven't realized it. And you can use these all you need to. They're very handy. So Vitarka, an example of Vitarka would be, say you're practicing your Kriya and you're thinking in your head and actually thinking the words of the steps of the Kriya as you're going through it. That could be a Vitarka. That is a gross reasoning where you're using your thought to keep yourself focused on your meditation and focused on what you're doing. Other examples would be like, say, if you're doing like Buddhist meditation and you're sitting there and you're breathing in and breathing out, you could think inhale on the inhale and exhale on the exhale. Or Yogananda taught Hong Sa. That's a Vitarka, right? You're using that mantra to help keep yourself focused on your meditation object. Another example, which is probably one of the most purest examples of Vitarka, is in self-inquiry as taught by Ramana Maharshi. He would tell people to ask themselves, who am I? And not look for an answer, but look for that experience of I. So the words, who am I, is a Vitarka. And then when you're coming back and you're feeling that that is your vichara. That's the subtle reasoning. He would say, and as you're sitting there and you're performing self-inquiry, if your mind starts wandering off onto something else, think, to whom do these thoughts arise? Once again, that's a vitarka, which is bringing you back to your vichara, the sense of I that you're observing. Some people try to claim that self-inquiry is not yoga, and that is completely false. It actually conforms very well to the Yoga Sutras. It's a meditation on the sense of I. And even within the Yoga Sutras, which we'll get into, we get into yamas and niyamas next time, there's self-study, which is literally self-inquiry, study of the self. So there's a little bit of a tangent there, but I'm just showing you different ways that you can use vitarka. And vichara, like I told you, in that case, it would be like the I sense. In say you're doing regular Buddhist meditation where you're just focusing on the sensations of the breath in and out of your nostrils. Like I told you, the vitarka you could be thinking in and out, as you're breathing, to keep your mind focused on it. You could also use some vichara, and the vichara would be like looking for the cool sensations on the inhale and looking for the warm sensations on the exhale. So the cool and the warm are subtle reasoning. It's a subtle, whereas the vitarka you're using to point to the gross whole object of the breath, the cool and warm sensation is a characteristic of the breath. So it's a more subtle, object, and that would be considered a vichara. Likewise, like in Kriya, a lot of times we're focusing on the sensations and whatnot, and those different sensations would be vicharas as well. And another thing is visualizations could be another form of it could be a vitarka or a vichara, depending, on what you're doing. So, because you could have really gross visualizations or really subtle visualizations, and that would kind of be the difference there between the two. Most of the time, though, like what we're doing in Kriya specifically, it would be more of a vichara if you're using any kind of a visualization to help you maintain focus. So these things, like the vitarkas and the vicharas, and even visualizations, and all these things, they're kind of crutches in a way, right? They're there to kind of help you to stay on your meditation object, to keep that constant stream of thought on your meditation object. So thoughts about your meditation object are okay. You can take thoughts about your meditation object all the way into samadhi because you're still one-pointed. Your thoughts are still pointing in the direction of whatever your meditation object is. So even though in Dhyana, you're not going to have distractions, from the mind going off, you could still have a vitarka. Another example of vitarka is just checking in every so often. Say, like every 3 breaths that you take, reminding yourself to just ask, am I still focusing clearly? and just checking back in. Is my focus still as sharp as it was, or has it gotten dull? If it's starting to getting dull, remind yourself to kind of boost up and sharpen your focus a little bit more. These are all different ways that you can use vitarka and vichara, um, and they're very helpful to get into samadhi, get through these different limbs. Do we have any questions on vitarka and vichara? Okay, no questions. Cool. I know a lot of people are kind of confused on the difference between the two, so I hope I did a good job explaining them. It can be kind of tricky. Um, so then we get into samprajnata samadhi, right? Which is um, samadhi with eye sense. Okay. Now this is tricky here because some people, when you're in samadhi, it's non-dual, right? I already told you that's non-dual absorption, so there's no difference between you and the meditation object. But there's still a sense of I in samprajnata. You are everything that you're observing in your meditation. And um, when you get into asamprajnata, that even is gone. So well, there's really 8 levels of samadhi, right? And there's 4 different attributes. So we've already talked about vitarka and we've already talked about vichara, right? So you can have savitarka or nirvitarka. Sa meaning with vitarka or nirvitarka meaning without vitarka. You can have savichara with vichara or nirvichara without vichara. You can also have sa-ananda or nirananda with or without the sensation of bliss. Sa-asmita and nir-asmita with or without asmita. Asmita meaning the I sense. Okay? So you can see there's 8 different permutations here, right? Because you can have with or without vitarka, with or without vichara, with or without ananda, and with or without asmita. And these usually go in order, but not always. So usually you'll start off and you'll have all 4 present, and then you'll be able to leave the vitarka behind and go nirvitarka. But then you're still, at that point, savichara, sa-ananda, and sa-asmita. So when if you say if you say you've reached nirvitarka, it means you had all 3 of the other ones. If you reach a point where you have nirvichara, you still have sa, ananda, and sa asmita. If you get to nirananda, you still have sa asmita. And when you get to nirasmita, that's the same thing as asamprajnata. Okay, so they're both the same thing. Asamprajnata means is without any of these signs at all. None of them are present. So, and that state is indescribable. So I won't even attempt to describe it. I will just leave you to experience it when you get there. But at least know that um, you can at least recognize these 4 things in your meditation, right? And you can notice when they're gone, when they go in the background, and when they disappear, right? So, and that means that right here on this 3rd one, this is the hardest one for people to get rid of, right? The ananda, the bliss. People just want to bake in that bliss, and I've been there, where you just want to just stick in there and hold on to that, and you don't want to let that go. But eventually you have to let that go, and when that's gone, all that's left is just pure I sense. Pure I sense and nothing more. And that's not saying this is not still a blissful experience. It's still an extremely blissful experience, but it's not. It's kind of like in Pratyahara, how your body goes in the background. The bliss kind of goes in the background. and you're kind of moving. The Buddhists kind of like to call this like nothingness, like you're kind of moving towards nothingness in a way, right? Um, and to be able to get there, you kind of have to leave a lot, especially the more gross parts of the bliss behind. You know, just nothingness in itself is blissful, but it's not like a really physical bliss. Um, Bliss comes in many different kinds, many different flavors, right? So it's kind of tricky, you know. People usually when they're thinking of bliss, they're thinking more along the lines of like physical, like pleasure, you know, and that's not really what we're talking about at this level. You know, the physical's gone. Um, it's different. Like I said, it's really hard to describe when you get at this point. So the words just they just don't really exist, especially in the English language. Um, Even in Sanskrit, it's hard to describe this stuff. But you can at least you should at least be able to recognize these four signs. Therefore, you should also be able to recognize when all four signs are gone. You know, um, and when all four are gone, you're in asamprajnata, and that's really samadhi in a nutshell. All eight stages of samadhi. So, yeah. Does anybody have any questions? Well, remember, or if you go all the way back to my first presentation I did for you guys, which was the theory of Kriya. If you remember, there's a difference between the meditation samadhi states and the waking states of samadhi, right? So the what I just described for you was the meditation stages of samadhi, right? The waking stages of samadhi is something different. You know, that's outside of meditation practice, and those stages are Nirbeeja samadhi or samadhi without seed, which is the same thing as you hear about Nirvikalpa. You know, the word Vikalpa means illusion, plain and simple. So Nirvikalpa means without illusion. You know, it's basically so how the Yoga Sutras describes Vikalpa is if I look at an object, I don't really see that object. I see my past conditioning of that object, my memory of that object, my assumptions of that object, my latent tendencies, my latent impressions of that object are what I'm really seeing. So if I see a little harmless garter snake on the ground, I could get afraid and think, oh, you know, that's a snake. It's poisonous. It's going to harm me. You know, and that's an illusion. I'm not seeing the world for what it really is. I'm not even seeing that individual snake as being itself. I'm just seeing, oh, snake, and then I'm not really seeing the snake. I'm seeing my latent impression of snakes, you know. And that's a distortion and causes stress and causes all kinds of stuff. So, um, in a state of nirvikalpa, you're basically, it basically means you're fully present all the time. You're seeing the world exactly as it is. You're not judging anything based on the past. You're not assuming anything in the future. You're not basing off of memories. You're just viewing every present moment as it is. And the clouding of the brain that clouds over everything that we normally experience is gone. And Nirbeeja Samadhi is basically the same thing. Samadhi without seed is what it means. So it means you're in Samadhi, meaning Samadhi is a term for, in the Yoga Sutras, they use the terms yoga and Samadhi interchangeably. The word yoga means union. But Samadhi is really the same thing, right? You're in the state of union all the time. That's Nirbeeja Samadhi. And Nirbeeja Samadhi is one of those things, you know, like I described in that first video, it's kind of like a container, right? Where the minute you start performing sadhana, you're starting to kind of put drops of water into that container, right? And over time, that slowly fills up more and 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 more until eventually you reach the point of Nirbeeja. And that's kind of like what this is like, right? It's just kind of a slow process that happens over time. And the way that process happens is through your sadhana, through the practice of the Ashtanga, or 8 limbs of yoga. Ashtanga, Ashta means 8, and Anga means limb. I know a lot of times we equate Ashtanga with Ashtanga Yoga TM, which is a specific form of Hatha Yoga, but that's not actually an accurate name. Ashtanga just means the 8 limbs. So we practice these full 8 limbs to bring us to Nirbeeja. And then after Nirbeeja, there's Dharma Mega. And the Yoga Sutras defines Dharma Mega as the knowledge that the buddhi, or the discriminating intelligence, is different from the purusha, or the pure consciousness. Realizing there's a difference. Okay, and this is important too when we look at the asmita part of the limbs of samadhi, because the buddhi, the purusha gives birth to the buddhi, and the buddhi gives birth to the asmita, the I sense. So they're kind of, in these 3 things, are, even though they're different, they're so close together that they almost seem like they're one. To most people, they seem like they're one thing. The consciousness and the I sense and the discriminating intelligence all seem to be one thing, but they're really not. The buddhi is it's a reflection of the purusha. It's like when the moon reflects off of the water, right? The moon's not really in the water. They're actually separate, but it appears like it's in the water. The buddhi is what presents things to the purusha, to the consciousness. So everything that you experience, like when I'm looking and all of this color that is happening to the buddhi, it's happening to the buddhi, and the buddhi is the one that's presenting that to the purusha. The purusha is attributeless. Okay, it's completely attributeless. So Dharma Mega is coming to the permanent realization, Dharma Mega Samadhi at least, the permanent realization of an experience of buddhi being different from purusha. You can also go into a Dharma Mega Dhyana, which is like a temporary stage, which I know we've discussed before, because we had one of our satsang members have that experience in a meditation, and so yeah, that's Dharma Mega Dhyana. When that becomes permanent, that's Dharma Mega Samadhi. And then the last stage is Kaivalya, which translated into English means basically total and complete detachment. You no longer are attached to anything at all. You're no longer affected by the 3 gunas, no longer affected by any karmas, no longer affected by any samskaras, no vasanas present, just pure existence. So our sadhana brings us to the point where we can start getting these waking states, these things that happen outside. And Lahiri Mahashai made a point of saying that even if you get to Kaivalya, that you still need your sadhana. If you try to drop your sadhana, you're going to risk falling backwards. So even when you reach Kaivalya, you still need to continue to practice your sadhana, at least per our Param Guru. So yeah, that kind of talks about, the waking stages of spiritual progress, which we're in the process of going through right now. These are two separate things. Um, any other questions, and did that clarify everything? Sure. I'm having a hard time hearing you. Can you speak up a little bit louder? I'm still having a hard time understanding. You're really quiet. I know I heard you talking about Om Japa and the chakras. Forrest talking about that. Um, it sounded like you were asking about that and how that relates to Dharana, Dhyana, and Samadhi. Is that correct, or is that correct? Okay. Yeah, I'm still having a hard time hearing you. Let me answer the first part here, and then if you can type that second part in, just type it into the chat. Maybe that would be easier. Yeah, it's just it's really quiet. It's hard to hear. And a different accent as well makes it a little bit tougher as well. um, but so as far as the Om Japa is concerned, when we're doing Kriya, okay, we're when I'm talking about the Yoga Sutras, we're talking on the most general level, right? This is the general layout of yoga, okay? Within that, there are many different ways that we can create specific sadhanas. There are infinite individual sadhanas that we could create. So like Om Japa and the chakras and what we're doing in Kriya, that is our specific sadhana. Now, um, so those are the tools that we're using to help us go through these. At the same time, if you remember back to the talk that I gave on the evolution through the chakras, um, I spoke with how, us doing the Om Japa and the chakras, it helps us as spiritual beings to evolve, right? And I went and kind of listed out, how the chakra development goes, even in the animal kingdom, from like matter to plants to animals, the differences between different animals and difference between, animals and humans. And, remember when we went through all of that stuff. And then you remember at the end, I talked about how when we were talking about um, the chakra capacity between these different things, that there was a difference between capacity and utilization, right? There are some humans on this planet that are lesser evolved than some dogs on this planet are, for instance. Because while the dog has less capacity in their chakras, they may be actually using more capacity total than some humans do, especially humans in their first birth. Remember, I think I used the example of like people that appear on like Jerry Springer, as like really, people in their first birth or two, they're still very animalistic, um, not very evolved. And you compare that to a saint, and they're both humans. They're both humans, but they're almost two completely different animals, right? Like the saint is so much more evolved than the person on Springer. It's just like night and day. How are these even the same type of animal? So, that's really what we're doing, specifically in Kriya when we're doing the Om Japa and the chakras. And, everything we're doing in Kriya is helping us to evolve away from being a Springer guest and more towards being the saint, right? At one point in our past, we were that Springer guest. At some point we lived our first, human iteration and we were lesser evolved, and this is one reason why I'm not really big on like past lives and stuff like that, is I see that like I don't really care about past lives because they were all a lesser evolved state, you know. Um, so in a way, this almost has more to do with, the waking states, the Nirbeeja and the Dharma Mega and the Kaivalya than it does the meditation states. But it also helps that as well because um, as we bring the consciousness and raise it up into the higher centers, it makes it really easy to go into Dharana and Dhyana and Samadhi. Matter of fact, I don't think you can go into Samadhi without, raising your consciousness up. I'm not using the word Kundalini on purpose because it's kind of a loaded term these days. There's a lot of nonsense about Kundalini out there on the internet, and I try not to fuel that, but I'll try to be more accurate to what it really is, which is your consciousness. When that's raised up, you know, it needs to, it's a requirement to go into Samadhi. There's no way to go into Samadhi, there's no way to become liberated without having a quote unquote Kundalini awakening. Whether or not you go through, crazy energetic experiences or not, you know. And okay, it looks like you typed in the thing, so let's see what you write here. Forrest says we picked the right team, the Pandavas, and therefore win the war of Kurukshetra. How does picking the right team click into this topic of Samyama? Okay, excellent, excellent, excellent question. So, Kriya specifically is, as taught through Lahiri Mahashai, is the Battle of Kurukshetra in action, right? So the Pandavas are symbolic for the six chakras, right? Krishna actually is the sorry, it's the five chakras, five lower chakras. Krishna is the Anya chakra. Arjuna specifically is the Manipura. And the reason why is because the Manipura is the seat of action. So Krishna, the guru, Ashok Singh used to call the Anya chakra the guru chakra. It's like the guru is talking to the center of action and instructing it on how to take action in yoga, how to practice this Ashtanga, these eight limbs of yoga, or in our case, Kriya, which is one specific eight limb practice within the framework of the Ashtanga framework that Patanjali laid out. So, kind of like what I was saying, before, when we go back to the evolution here, the lower chakras is where most people's consciousness is primarily situated, right? And that, especially these three lower chakras, really, that's where your drive for like money and power and sex and greed and hatred and all of these things all come out of these lower centers, right? So we're trying to clear all that stuff out, you know. We want to remove all that blockage, all that gunk that is stopping our consciousness from being able to rise up to these higher centers where love and bliss and creativity and knowledge and wisdom are found. So, you know, we're really utilizing the Pandavas, the different chakras in Kriya specifically, we're utilizing those to fight the war of Kurukshetra. And who is the war of Kurukshetra being fought against? The Kauravas. What are the Kauravas? The desires, the senses of action, the sense of self. Dhritarashtra is called the blind king. The blind king is the buddhi. That's what we were talking about earlier, right? Dhritarashtra is the buddhi. The discriminating intelligence that's blind. It doesn't see a thing. It only knows what is relayed to it through the senses in the nervous system. It never actually directly perceives anything. It's only reading the electrical signals of your senses and interpreting them. And as such, your interpretations can have distortion. You can see visual hallucinations. You can have auditory hallucinations. The things that are presented to you aren't necessarily true. Um, so, yeah, does that kind of make sense? So we're utilizing the Pandavas to fight the sense objects and the attachments and the desires and all that kind of stuff. And that's how we get, that's not so much how we get to samadhi and meditation, that's how we get to Nirbeeja and Dharma Mega and Kaivalya. Yeah, so all these things, like right now I've been giving the Yoga Sutras framework for this. And, this is kind of the Bhagavad Gita framework, which is, they're both talking about the same thing, but, it's a different vantage point and a different, um, the Bhagavad Gita uses, the analogy of the war, whereas the Yoga Sutras doesn't really use any analogy. The Yoga Sutras is actually a pretty dry text. It's very scientific, very precise. It doesn't really have a whole lot of fluff in it. It's this is this definition, this is that definition. These are how these things go together. These are the steps that you take. Um, yeah, make sense? Any other questions? Sure. There is, yes. That is a very good question. The sleep states and how they correlate to the different limbs, the different angas. So, like you heard me say, the Dharana would be most correlated to the waking state, right? Because in Dharana, you still have the left brain activity, they still have the thinking mind, you still have a lot of the beta brain waves going on. As you get into Dhyana, the beta brain waves start going down, left brain starts going down. And like the theta and the theta and alpha brain waves start kind of going up, which is similar to what you see in sleep, you know. Um, like I said, in the early stages of dhyana, it can almost be like you're dreaming, but you're still awake. And then as you get into samadhi, you kind of move beyond that. So samadhi is probably closest to the deep sleep state. But just like in the deep sleep too, I think you get really high gamma. Um, so the the big difference though here is that you are awake and you are conscious for the whole thing. Whereas normally, even in your dream sleep, you're still only kind of with it. You're really dull. There's a lot of tamas in sleep. It's a tamasic thing. Um, tamas isn't all bad. Obviously, we need tamas to rest and recuperate, right? But you're not really clear and sharp in your consciousness when you're in a dream. You're really foggy and fuzzy. And when you're in deep sleep, you're not really conscious at all. You're completely blacked out. It's pure tamas, you know. Um, but you go through that in this process. Only you're awake and you're conscious and you're sharp the whole time. You're not dull. You should not be getting dull in your meditation. I know Forrest did a video called Stone Samadhi on that subject right there, which, Buddhists refer to the term dullness a lot. Your meditation should always be bright and vivid and sharp. If they start getting dull, that's not a good thing. Now, things will get really foggy and really crazy as you start getting into Dhyana, but they should still stay sharp and stay vivid. Does that make sense? Sure. hmm Yes. Yes. That's a very good question. Let me think on that for a second here. The question, how going back to the Nirvikalpa about how when you see the snake and it's just a harmless snake, your Vikalpa um, can cause you to be afraid. But what happens if it is a dangerous snake? Well, if it is a dangerous snake, you will still be there present in the moment, and you will react accordingly. There's also a difference between a dangerous snake and an aggressive dangerous snake. You know what I'm saying? Like here, I live in a place where we have rattlesnakes, and I'm a big hiker. I go hiking all the time. And this time of year, when it's the warmer part of the year, I see rattlesnakes out in the trail all the time, and I don't freak out. I just let them pass, and sometimes I'll get pretty close to them before I'll notice them. I've had times where I've been like, like that to them, and then I'll just stop. They don't like us either, and I can tell he's not coiled up. He's not looking aggressive. You can tell he doesn't think of me as a threat at the moment, but he still doesn't want to be near me, so I can just kind of pause and let him pass without having to like get afraid and pump my body up with all these stress hormones and everything. I can just kind of take it for what it is and let the snake do his thing, and he'll let me do mine. You know what I mean? Now, if I saw a snake that was coiled up and looked agitated, you know, then I would, instead of waiting for the snake to move out of the way, I would move out of the way. I would go around. Or if I'm on a trail, I'd turn around and go back the other way. Okay, that's enough of this hike. You know? um, but that would be staying present in the moment and viewing the situation for what it is, not seeing anything that's an illusion. The word vikalpa means illusion, right? So I'm not seeing an illusion. I'm seeing the world exactly as it is at that point in time. And if in that point in time a lion is chasing me down, then the proper thing to do is to get afraid and to run, and to pump the body with stress hormones and let the fight or flight kick in because even though I'm at a point where I'm seeing past the illusion, that doesn't mean that I want to die and be eaten by a lion. You know what I mean? So we can still have um, that reaction, but that reaction is based on reality and based on the present moment, not based on uh, past um, conditioning and latent judgments, tendencies, you name it. And you can see how, this is something that, most people suffering is self-generated in their mind through this thing. Like you see this kind of thing all the time too. Somebody like goes through a bad relationship, and the first thing is, they say when they get out of it is, I'm going to be single for the rest of my life. What is that? They just instantiated that Vikalpa. They said, the rest of my life, every time this happens, it's always going to be this way, even though that's not true. It'd be like, if say, I don't know, say you drank milk every day and one day you drank, a bad glass of milk and you got sick and you said, I'm never going to drink milk again because milk makes you sick. It's like a similar thing. It's an illusion. It's not really true. And one thing I find actually fascinating in psychology is cognitive behavioral therapy, because they do something very similar where they take people that are having really distorted thoughts and really unrealistic and just exaggerated thoughts about things, that can cause them to suffer depression, what have you, and try to deconstruct those thoughts to, what is real and what is false, what's exaggeration. Our mind is really good at exaggerating things. Um, and that's kind of a similar thing too. That's actually it's actually a very good thing for yogis to do if they haven't. All of us in yogi that practice yoga, we're going to have past things come up. I went through therapy at different points as well, and it can be a part of our sadhana. It can be very helpful. Yoga and therapy, done properly, can go together. Anything else? All right. We've covered a lot of ground. I've really dumped a lot of my brain out, so I hope you guys have been able to soak it in. I will get the recording up there shortly, and in 2 weeks we will go back and we will do some cleanup by hitting the yamas and the niyamas. Last but definitely not least, they're very important. Um, but we usually want to, in Kriya, we start with sadhana. We start with sadhana because if you start with sadhana, the namas and niyamas a lot of times tend to work themselves. Um, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't still go back and study them and try to intentionally practice them. So we will we will go back and we will do that. So with that, I bid you all adieu. Bye. Yep. Thanks.